All right, good morning, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started with today's Committee of the Whole. So happy Tuesday, our last meeting in August. We have a full agenda before us today, and then commissioners, let me draw your attention to a couple things. Right after Committee of the Whole, I'm going to call the question to go in executive session so that we can hear a legal opinion. And then we have Public Safety Committee at 11:30, so the three commissioners who serve on that will be down in room 601. And then we have Legislative Committee at 12:30, so the three of us who serve on that's on the fifth floor at 12:30. And then we'll be back in here for our evening meeting tonight.
We have a second exec session on bargaining.
We have what?
Second exec session.
Oh, we have two exec sessions. Oh, I didn't have that before me. Okay, so commissioners, we have two executive sessions. One is on collective bargaining and one is on a legal opinion. Okay. All right. So with that, we'll get started. So we're going to start off our day today with an update from Ms. Allison Sutter talking about the Grand Rapids Energy Performance Update. And with that being said, I see some of the members from our Energy Advisory Team that has been meeting with us for well over a year now. So thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to Allison for a brief presentation and update.
All right. Well, thank you. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager, and staff. As the Mayor said, going to provide a very brief update on energy performance for city operations this morning. So just a quick overview where we're headed, going to provide a few background highlights, talk about the current state of our energy performance for city operations, and then close with some future initiatives. And do want to acknowledge that the work that I'm going to share in the presentation today should be attributed to our energy team members, which are staff that sit on an energy team, as well as our Energy Advisory Committee. So as you, I think, are very aware, the city's been committed to energy efficiency and renewable energy for nearly 15 years. And in the strategic plan that was approved by you in April, the first objective under the health and environment priority is to reduce carbon emissions and increase climate resiliency. For purposes of today's presentation, I'm going to talk about strategy 2 and 3, which is reducing the carbon footprint of city operations. This includes our buildings, our utilities, and our fleet, as well as assessing the feasibility and cost of achieving the 100% renewable energy goal. So now looking at calendar year 2018, it's taken some time to really build out and collect all of the data. We have 335 energy utility accounts across 200 facilities for our city portfolio. With that, we generate just less than 57,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, which is how we measure our carbon footprint. And this cost the city $9.3 million for 1 year in energy costs. So the center pie chart talks about what is it that we're consuming. So 60% of what we consume is electricity, followed by gas and the fuel that we use for our fleet, which is a little less than 20%. You can see if you're looking at our carbon footprint on the right, that's really made up mostly from electricity as well as the fuel from our fleet. And then on the far left, if you're looking at cost, we really pay the most for electricity. That's because we use the most electricity, and electricity costs more than the other fuel types that we're using. So moving along, breaking this down by department now, over 50% of the energy that we consume is for our water utilities. And this is really because it takes an enormous amount of electricity to pump and treat our water for our two utilities. So just highlighting here, the wharf is the greatest energy user at 19%, the filtration plant at 18%. Our fleet and all of the fuel we're using for our fleet, inclusive of the dash, 17%, facilities 11%, and then streetlights are 10%. So now in terms of how have we been performing over time, in this graph, the numbers in the green circles show the change year over year, and the numbers in the blue circle are change from the baseline year. And this is showing weather normalized energy consumption. It's very important to normalize for variations in weather that we see from year to year. But our baseline is predominantly 2015, although we do have some facilities that have tracked data back to 2005, so it's a blended baseline based on the most historic data we have for facilities. So looking at 2017, you'll see that we've reduced our energy consumption just shy of 9%, and that accounts to about $800,000 per year in savings. But you will then see from 2017 to 2018, we had an increase in how much energy, 3% increase. So in comparing 2018 to our baseline, it's about a 5.3% reduction. We're starting to dig into the data more now that we have a system in place for tracking all of this, but a large part of that is due to our water utilities growth in customers and customer demand. And so we're going to be working on a way to normalize for our customer growth as well to better identify the efficiencies for our facilities. So now transitioning to talk about our path to our 100% renewable energy. I think hopefully you know that we were one of the first cities to adopt a 100% renewable energy goal in 2007. We're currently at 34%, and this pie chart shows that that's predominantly made up of 26% of buying renewable energy credits, as well as just shy of 8% comes from Consumers Energy's own portfolio that's required under state law for them to source renewable sources of energy as well. I do want to take a minute to note that our goal is specific to our city operations, and there are other cities that are looking at community-wide goals that would be inclusive of the energy being consumed by our residents, businesses, and organizations in the community. And the Sierra Club did an analysis, and they've identified that there are 133 cities, a number of states, DC, Puerto Rico, that have adopted community-wide renewable energy or carbon reduction goals. But I want to focus here on the 5 bullet points. There are really 2 ways for us to achieve our renewable energy goal. The first is to reduce how much energy we use, and the second is to offset what we are using with renewables. So as I mentioned, Consumers Energy is sourcing a certain amount of renewables in their own portfolio. They've made a commitment to increase that to 90% by 2040. So that is going to help us achieve our renewable energy goal as well. I have a couple slides on energy efficiency and solar, but also wanted to note, I know you're familiar with our Wharf Biodigester project. That renewable natural gas in the future, if we would like to consider using that as a source of renewable energy with the wharf, we're able to do that. And then purchasing renewable energy credits. We could go out right now and buy enough renewable energy credits to meet our 100% goal tomorrow. If that's something that you wanted to do, it's not something that I recommend. It's typically something, though, that's used as a gap to fill for what you can achieve via efficiency or solar or other measures. Okay. So just really wanted to emphasize, why is energy efficiency so important? This helps reduce operational costs, and it is pretty much always the fastest and greatest return on investment for the different types of investments that we can make in the energy world, particularly trying to achieve our renewable energy goal. It decreases greenhouse gas emissions, helps to improve air quality, decrease public health impacts, can stimulate job growth in the green energy sector, and I believe as a city, when we're promoting this for our community, we need to be leading by example. There are 2 areas where I'm going to show external organizations are determining how efficient are we operating our facilities. The first is the US EPA and Energy Star certification. 2018, if you remember, we had 6 buildings certified. You have to achieve a 75 or greater on a 100-point score or a 100-point scale. We are currently in the process of getting 3 of those facilities certified again this year: 1120 Monroe, the police station, and 201 Market. The ones that were certified last year that are not eligible this year are City Hall, due to our large HVAC project. We had 1 small ancillary building that we have sold, and then we are looking into better understanding why 509 Wealthy has fallen below the 75 threshold. So this just came out in July, and it is produced by the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. This 1-page summary was included as a part of your packet. They have been creating a clean energy scorecard for several years now. They do it every other year, but this was the first year that they expanded it to include the top 75 largest metro areas. So it's the first time that Grand Rapids has been included. We are one of the smallest cities to be included, but we did rank 38th out of 75, and we were the highest Michigan ranking city. And they go through and they evaluate our operations in 5 different categories. And I will note that they have recommended some efficiencies, and I'm happy to present that we are making some movement and intend to be working on those in the short term. Okay, so now discussing about solar. So we partnered with the U.S. Department of Energy National Renewable Energy Lab, which is short NREL, through a SolSmart program. And NREL conducted a techno-economic assessment of 8 of our facilities. So looking at technically, can we install solar, how much would it generate, and how much would it cost, and what are the economics of it. And so here, listed on this slide, are the facilities that were included, and the picture is showing what solar might look like on the roof of our police department. So the technical assessment showed that we could install just shy of 44,000 kilowatts of solar, and that could generate around 4 million kilowatt hours. So what does that mean? That means if installed, this would move us from 34% to 40% for our renewable energy generation. This does not include Butterworth, which I'm going to get to on the next slide, so this is the other 7 facilities. But I do want to note, just last week, in partnership with our Energy Advisory Committee and consumers, we discovered that there was an error in how the economic assessment was completed and the results in that. And so we are working with them to rerun the economic assessment and believe that it's actually going to show better results in terms of the economics of how and if we can be installing solar on our own facility. So as soon as I have that available, I will be sure to make that available for the commission. So then wrapping up solar with a discussion on Butterworth, because I know that tends to be the hot question that we get. We've had both consumers and NREL did some estimates, kind of desk analysis, if you will, of how much solar could we install on our Butterworth landfill and what would that generate. So you can see with the numbers it varies between about 14 and 17 megawatts, which means it could generate around 17 to 25 million kilowatt hours per year. For purposes of comparison, the solar installation that went into MSU on their carport was just around 10 megawatts. So it would be about 2/3 the size of what we could possibly put in at Butterworth. And so what we intend to do is finalize a memorandum of understanding with Consumers Energy about installing solar at Butterworth that could then supply our primary circuit. And happy to report we're currently in the works of finalizing that MOU and hope it to be done here in the next month. And after that, we would be moving to issue a request for proposal for solar. But do need to work with our Butterworth site group and some other partners along that process. So I do also just want to note, along with that, we are continuing to have conversations with consumers, because another option is we could work with them and they would install and own and operate a community solar program at Butterworth as well that would allow for residents or businesses in our community to kind of subscribe to solar via that. So as soon as we have kind of the results from both of those different options, we'll be bringing it back to provide some information to you. So then to wrap up with future initiatives here in the short term about the next 6 months, these are the key areas for some work with respect to city operations. Discuss the RFP for solar at Butterworth and also rerunning the economic analysis for our other 7 facilities with NREL. The broader team and staff are continuing to work on an LED street lighting strategy, and we'll be continuing to identify how many RECs, renewable energy credits, we could purchase and at what cost that might be, and then really the key report out being 100% renewable energy strategy that would show these different opportunities for meeting our goal. And then just also wanted to note, looking to provide an update to the City Commission on some of our community-facing energy and carbon reduction initiatives that we have going on versus city operations. So lastly, I just wanted to take a quick minute to introduce João Oliveira is our new full-time employee who started yesterday as our Energy, Climate, and Performance Management Specialist. So he'll be helping with the energy work as well as our strategic plan implementation work as well. And then I wanted to make sure you were aware that on September 25th, we're hosting a very large climate change conference here in Grand Rapids that's expected to pull over 500 people. And the keynote is an internationally renowned speaker, Paul Hawken, on climate change and environmental work. So with that, I am happy to take any questions that you may have.
All right. Thank you. Commissioners, questions? Commissioner O'Connor?
Yeah, thank you for the the report. A couple quick questions. One, just as you look at you look back to your slide about the baseline and the cost savings, and do you have like some sort of analysis of what we've expended to create these energy savings and efficiencies, and then like what a return on investment looks like for getting to that point? Like what's the What's the arc on that?
So I don't have a number right now, but I will make sure that that's a part of what we are assessing. We have been pulling and trying to create a database that tracks all of the energy efficiency projects we've done with how much they cost, the capital requirement, the estimated return on investment as well. So I'll continue to work on that so I can get that for you.
And then the second question, just for the Butterworth landfill site, is that, is the hope that we maintain control of that and feed our primary circuit rather than send that to the grid? Is that how we anticipate being an owner of that rather
So-
than?
Yes, so there are two options. We could go out and through the RFP process would work with a partner to develop solar there, but we would essentially be kind of the owners and we could be the operators of that solar, which likely would probably have the best financial return over the long term for us, but would require upfront decisions for commission around how we would raise the capital to pay for that installation. The alternative approach would be for the community solar would be actually consumers would own and operate and install and would then sell that and raise the money to pay for it via people subscribing to it, whether it be businesses. We could also be a subscriber. So Western Michigan has and GVSU have community solar, and they're both kind of the largest subscribers. But those are kind of the two options that we want to present to commission.
Very good, thank you.
Other questions? My only question is related to where we are with the upgrades to the primary circuit and then the plan moving forward with the LED. I know all of us were aware that RFQ, I think, went out, and that was some time ago. I know many of us have heard from folks who who install LED, and I'm just wondering, if not today, if the full body could get an update on where we are with that work.
I'm going to invite either Deputy City Manager DeLong or if Managing Director Almonte is here. I think that they have the best information to share with you on that, so
Great,
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I think the best option would be for us to provide a detailed report to Commission about where we are with the project. So we have a list of several projects that have to do with the infrastructure work, and that's well underway now, and you've awarded at least 3 contracts, I think. I think the most recent one was the one for Circuit West over by, on the northwest side. So that's probably the best course.
Okay,
Then that's what I'd like to do.
great.
Okay?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mayor,
Yeah, go ahead.
while Deputy City Manager DeLong is standing there,
I'm not running. I'm just moving. So.
I also, first of all, let me thank Ms. Sutter for her presentation and briefing and her leadership in this area and all of your support. Another related topic that was mentioned in the presentation was the biodigester. And I know that there's been various reports about our permitting, and I'm pleased to let the commission and public know that as of August 9th, we have received our air quality permit from the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Yes. And that project is proceeding forward as planned.
Great, thanks.
Yes.
Appreciate that update. Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner.
I want to add my thanks to you, Allison. We had the opportunity to hear much of this the other day at our Energy Advisory Committee, so it isn't entirely new. It is interesting to read in the report that 6 cities have met their community-wide goal to transition to 100%. I know that we need to get our own house in order before we go out to the community, and we already are in many respects. Certainly also appreciate the notion and support that we don't just try to purchase renewable energy credits, that we do what we can around efficiencies here again in our own house. And the opportunities are out there certainly to work with the community to do that in our residential community and our business community to provide tremendous savings as we perhaps do other sorts of remediations around lead, around any kind of blight reduction. So looking forward to, I won't necessarily be at this table just to see what the city's able to do as we move out into the community as well. Well, thanks for the report.
Thank you.
Yeah, the work around Zero Cities is exciting, and that's probably for another day or maybe even just an email providing the commission with an update. I believe a community partner was recently identified. Is that right?
Yes.
And is it Urban Core Collective?
It is, yes.
Okay, so we'll be working really closely with Urban Core Collective on that work with an eye towards how do we make sure that we're supporting that work in some of our neediest neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
So,
Okay.
great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so commissioners, that will take us to our second item, and I was informed by our clerk's office that this item is not ready for approval today, and so I am going to ask for a motion to postpone the resolution to approve the request for the Class C development liquor license. So can I get a motion to postpone that item?
So moved. Support.
All right. Do you want to have any comments about why it's being postponed?
Yep, absolutely. There was just a very minor delay in completing the vetting process, so we're not quite ready to bring it forward, but we will be ready by September 10th.
Okay, so this will be a postponement to
Okay. You have the date
September-
certain. Okay.
September 10th. All right, so the motion's on the table. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, it carries. All right, Commissioners, next is a resolution approving a contract with West Michigan Environmental Action Council in the amount of $3,233.50. And this is for the annual, the 16th annual Mayor's River Cleanup. So can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, hello, welcome. Come on up.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Madam Mayor, Commissioners, Mr. Washington, staff. Here on behalf of Cary River Vet and ESD, and showing our support for this resolution approving and contracting with WEMIAC for the annual Mayor's River Cleanup. It is the 16th annual event. It's really become a very popular and well-known event in both the city and our surrounding communities and partners. It's a river cleanup with Grand Rapids, Walker, Granville, Wyoming, and Plainfield Township. So it's really a regional event, and it's really doing great things in support in cleaning of the Grand River. Over 200,000 pounds of trash have been cleaned up along the banks over the course of this event. So it really has some major impacts, and with our focus of river restoration and GR Forward, it's really a key component of all those activities. So a highlight of this year's event is WEMIAC and our partners at the Lower Grand River Organization of Watersheds, Algro. They are rolling out an Adopt a Drain program, which citizens can, in their communities, adopt and maintain and clean catch basins and stormwater facilities around their homes, and it really gives them an opportunity to engage in stormwater and green infrastructure in those aspects. And that program was modeled after the city's Adopt a Basin and the Basin Buddy program. So we really took an opportunity to take a lead on that. So that's getting rolled out at a more regional event. So yeah, it's a successful program, and we've included the $3,233 in our annual budget. So it's really just a continuation of our support of this program.
Great, thanks. So Commissioners, you're welcome to join me on September 14th if you want to get in the water and pull out some trash. It's always a fun day. Thousands of volunteers. I think last year there were almost 2,000 volunteers. The WEMIAC does a fabulous job of organizing that many people to get out. And we go beyond just the Grand River, so we go out into the tributaries. So 2 years in a row I was out at Plaster Creek, and it's just a great way to get out with volunteers to help clean up our waters. And then you always find interesting things. So we take pictures of the most interesting things we pull out, like vacuum sweepers and
Tires and all sorts of magic.
and chairs and couches, and it's amazing what ends up in our waterways. And so if you want to come out, you are welcome to join me. And then afterwards, there's a big celebration at the park to thank volunteers. So hopefully I'll see you there. All right.
Thank you.
With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next is a resolution approving the submission of the Neighborhood Enterprise Zone Exemption Certificate application for the Bradford Station LLC project. All right, welcome. So we talked about this in Economic Development Project Team. So those of you around that table, you'll be familiar with this request. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Klooster.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. As was read off, this is the approval of a submission of a 12-year Neighborhood Enterprise Zone Exemption Certificate application filed by Bradford Station LLC, which is a group affiliated with the Bazzani Building Company. The project proposed on the corner of Bradford and Lafayette consists of a 3-story mixed-use building with 23 apartments and 600 square feet of ground floor retail space. The details of the rental apartments are shown on the table in your memo. There is one studio unit and 22 one-bedroom apartments with rents ranging from $975 to $1,175, with the square footage shown there. As Bazzani is known to do, this project is being proposed as it has some energy efficiency goals, so it's being proposed as a LEED Gold certified building, and it will participate in the Grand Rapids 2030 district. They are piloting a building that will use only electricity and no natural gas. The project total estimate is $3 million. 2 new jobs are estimated to be created in the ground floor retail space. The details of this application are such that the Neighborhood Enterprise Zone policy adopted by City Commission provides for a base term of 9 years, and this project is requesting 12 years. There are several ways that a project can sort of earn those additional years, and in this case, the developer is working closely with our Mobile GR department and the Rapid to make improvements to transit facilities in the area. So they will be installing a covered bus shelter and making the necessary infrastructure improvements to make that happen, and purchasing the bus shelter for installation. They have also been working with Mobile GR to kind of participate in enhanced marketing of Rapid operations to their customers, so providing wave cards and marketing the transit accommodations that are available outside of the development. So the development was approved for a special land use to allow the project as proposed in 2017, and it was reviewed by the Economic Development Project team earlier this month.
Great, thanks. Commissioners, just a couple of things I'll point out. We talked about this at Economic Development Project team, but just to remind you, this property is located in a neighborhood enterprise zone that was established back in 2005. And then also, this project does have support from the neighborhood. So they've been actively engaged in this process as well. So, any questions? All right. The last thing I'll say is it's really great that it'll be a LEED Gold certified building. So we talked about that at length as well during economic development. Okay, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, next that will bring us back to this topic that we talked about at our last meeting for a formal resolution. So this is a resolution approving public support for the West Michigan Express pilot project. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, so Commissioners, we heard this presentation last week from Mr. Naramore. Many other communities have formally adopted a resolution in support since this is a multi-jurisdictional project. Our team will support this work as well as the Rapid. So, Mr. Naramore, anything to add?
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, and City Manager. Nothing really to add to that other than we included a copy of the presentation from last week's meeting to answer any additional questions that folks have, but just wanted to highlight this is one of many initiatives that we have that not only supports getting employees from outside of the city into the city, but is also meant to help facilitate getting residents and people who live in the city out to the jobs and the employment out in the Chicago Drive corridor. So that's really important for us to continue to partner on that as we look over the next year for locating where those stops are located as the service comes into the city. So that's really, it's one of the initiatives that's highlighted in the mobility portion of the city strategic plan.
Great, thank you. All right. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? It carries. All right, thank you. And you can stay right up there because the next one is a resolution setting monthly parking rates of $150 for the 300 designated spaces at Studio Park and approval of an associated MOU with Jackson Entertainment LLC. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, so we are excited to have a new parking ramp downtown coming online,
Yes.
and we have spaces. So why don't you tell us about this and how we got this rate?
Yes, so just brief little overview of the history. So you may recall back in 2017, August of 2017, the City Commission approved a development agreement with Studio Park or Jackson Entertainment for the construction of the large multi-use, mixed-use development that exists just behind the Van Andel Arena. This involved the closure of 2 surface parking lots known as Area 4 and Area 5. There were approximately 600 spaces there, of which we had 440 active monthly parkers in those 2 facilities. So in March of 2016, when I first started at the city, one of the first projects was to start displacing those folks and reallocating them across the city in preparation for the closure of those 2 facilities for construction to begin. That was one of the big precursors to the monthly availability parking crunch. So we're really excited now almost 2 years later for the completion of the parking garage as part of this development. And you may recall that originally it was supposed to be a city-owned facility, and now it's a privately owned facility, of which the city has access to 300 parking cards for us to be able to reissue and resell for public use. And they are guaranteed from Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. And so we're bringing this forward to articulate a memorandum of understanding between us and the developer for how we're going to operate those parking cards, to clearly delineate that in addition to the developer agreement, as well as set the monthly parking rate for us to be able to charge. And the city is charging its own rate, and we're separate from the development, but currently it looks like we're charging the same rate. And this is for us to be able to recover the costs. For one, we have to pay for all 300 of those parking cards on the first day for the entire 12 months of the calendar year. And then for some of the changes for us administering them for administrative costs, credit card payment fees, and other things administratively. So that's why the fee is set for the first year at $150 a month, and any changes to that will be brought forward in future years. So we're very excited for these to open, and the facility is scheduled to open later in September. And later this week, we will be sending out notice to all of the folks who were parked there in March of 2016. They get right of first refusal. Before then, we send those out to wait list and then general public for offering if there is space that is available after that point.
That was my question, so thank you for answering that. All right, so commissioners, questions? Commissioner Kelly?
So I just am glad you pointed out that some of those numbers, Josh, because I know we've already moved a lot of people who were in areas 4 and 5. Can you give us a sense now, just because I get this question, people are always concerned about parking downtown. What is the average cost now, given the lots downtown for a covered lot, to at least build it?
So we're doing a big comprehensive analysis right now. Publicly for ours, the average cost is approximately $140 a month. So this is a little bit higher, but in some of our facilities, like Government Center here is $149 a month, and Pearl and Ionia is $151 a month. But this is a newer facility, a new state-of-the-art facility that's located in a very high-demand area. And we are committed in the development agreement to pay $140 per space already as we're in there. And so in order to recoup the cost, we had to adjust it a little bit higher than that to be able to recoup the administrative costs. And we can always reevaluate that after we get through the first year of administering the spaces.
Right, and I assume that the cost to build per space, we used to hear that $40,000 to $50,000 per space, depending on where it was, is probably still fairly accurate, if not more, given the
depends.
location.
Yes, depends on how many spaces you're building. You get economies of scale versus, the Spectrum garage that they're building that's about 1,200 spaces. They're a little bit lower per space cost than one like this because of the complexities associated with it.
Right.
But it's usually in the order of magnitude between 30 and 40, depending on some other factors.
Yeah, well, parking is very personal, as you often say, and people are often wondering why it does cost so much to park downtown. And we certainly want to welcome people and encourage them to take the dash in to save money as well. But it's so good to see these spaces coming in line. People definitely need them, and our businesses are looking for space. So thank you.
All right, other questions or comments? All right, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, next is a resolution to amend the City Commission Policy 1100-07, and this is related to our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
All right, and our Parks Director is here to tell us about this.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners, City Manager. This is an amendment to the current Parks Advisory Board policy being advanced and recommended by the current Advisory Board and the Department. Currently, there are 3 important seats on the Advisory Board representing Grand Rapids Public Schools, Friends of Grand Rapids Parks, and Downtown Grand Rapids Incorporated. There is also a residency requirement for each of those 3 seats. There's been a little bit of difficulty in keeping those seats filled with turnover. And so the board and the department are recommending a change in removing that residency requirement with the intention that we feel that that representation from those organizations is more important than residency. So that is the request in front of you today.
All right. All right, Commissioners, questions? Any feedback from the Appointments Committee? Commissioner Kelly?
Well, this isn't something that came to us for conversation. I don't know if it did to you, so I guess going forward, because I do have I understand the difficulty in filling these because we keep trying to do that, but I am sorry to see that. I always like to see our own residents on on those spots, and would even love to see Grand Rapids Public Schools perhaps tap into the Mayor's Youth Council. Because we've got some, juniors and seniors that are very adept, and if they were able to communicate, I think that'd be a tremendous opportunity for them to learn about getting involved on a board or a commission. So I guess in the future, we'd like to have some opportunity to weigh in on that, but I understand the need and the difficulty, because we're always trying to fill spaces. We just talked this morning about we get 2 filled, and then 2 people move away, and there we are again, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I
good.
think if we can keep the value still being that they live in the city, if needed, then we can have this provision for people from those 3 institutions, but not kind of losing sight of that it's ideal if they all live in the city.
Great, thanks. Commissioners, any other questions or comments? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next is a resolution accepting the South Division Corridor Area Specific Plan. And this is for release for public comment for amendment to the 2002 Grand Rapids Master Plan. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, so we're excited to have this before us today. A lot of work has gone into this. And so we have a presentation. Commissioners, you should all have a hard copy of this. And we'll let our Planning Director, Ms. Suzanne Schultz, start us off.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. It's with great pleasure that I'm here just to introduce the South Division Corridor Plan. Adam Rosa is here from the Camaros team, and he will be covering the process and principles that led to the plan's creation. There's just a little bit of background for you. The plan process began with a group of 9 advisors, which were formed from the community to really scope the project from the very beginning. And their input led to the creation of the request for proposals that hired the consultant team. That group then, and this has been going on since March of 2017, we then converted it into a steering committee of 20 individuals that guided the plan process. This was a very strategic, intentional process to make sure that we're focused on equity, particularly in a corridor where there's not neighborhood association representation except for in Garfield Park, and there's no organized business association. The Corridor Improvement District has been since created, the Corridor Improvement Authority, but that's just starting to get its legs underneath it. So one of the biggest challenges we had was finding community leaders that represented the voice of the community that could represent individuals when we don't have organized representation that you might find typical in an area-specific plan process. We do have several steering committee members who are here today who can answer questions also if you have them at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Adam.
Great, thank you. Hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me, Mayor, Commissioners. I first want to recognize the great leadership and work of Suzanne and her staff throughout this effort. They've been really amazing in really setting a course for success. And also, again, recognize our steering committee members and our community ambassadors that are here today and that have really been involved from day one. So I promised Mr. Washington I would try to get through this in 10 minutes, so I'm going to set my timer here. But recognize this is about 1.5 years of work, and we're going to do our best here. So here we go. Okay, so the South Division Corridor Plan is really founded on 6 core principles: community identity, meaningful engagement, development without displacement, health, environment, and quality of life, economic opportunity, and transportation. And all these principles come together under the greater banner of unity in the corridor. We're working in an area that's about 3 miles long from Wealthy on the north down to 28th on the south. And in doing so, we identified a series of focus areas where we really wanted to put a lot of our energy and effort in terms of the physical changes of what can happen on South Division. Suzanne mentioned we began in spring of last year. We had a kickoff meeting that was attended by over 1,000 residents in Garfield Park. I think it was the largest community planning event in the history of Grand Rapids, so that really set us off on a positive course for what we wanted to do with the rest of the plan. Again, the steering committee was absolutely critical to the success of this effort. They've been involved in every step of the way in leading the course and guiding the direction and putting the projects together. But also the Community Ambassador Program extremely successful. I think you should really be proud of the work that these ambassadors have done and recognize their work. I think this is a good model for other neighborhood-type planning efforts here in the city. Another thing that worked really well for us was establishing a pop-up headquarters space within the corridor. One of our steering committee members had a vacant space that he was renovating, and we used it as our home base throughout the process. This allowed a number of smaller community gatherings to happen, but also when we would have larger community meetings, people would generally just come in off the street to see what was going on. So that's something you don't get if you're in a church basement or a high school auditorium somewhere. So this was a really successful approach as well. We wanted to establish some early action projects while we were making the plan. So our ambassadors really led a lot of this, but we had a Taste on South Division project where we brought all the restaurants together to really try to support and coordinate efforts among the different restaurants along the corridor. There was a fashion show for retail businesses along the corridor that happened at the Kroc Center, and a variety of other programs, as well as the beginning of the development of a community development corporation called EPIC. So of those 6 overall priorities, each has a section of the plan. So each has a vision and objectives. Each has 3 primary projects that were highly rated. We had working groups that helped to establish these projects, and I'm not going to go one by one through each project, but as you look through the plan, there's a clear hierarchy of the goals of the community and the projects that support those goals. So development without displacement, we had projects including facilitate home repair improvements, and then other things that were related to advocacy at the state and federal level. So not just physical things to happen in the neighborhood, but really how do we make sure the voices of the community are heard in policy decisions. Economic opportunity, the number 1 project there was trying to recruit a credit union or a minority-owned bank to the corridor. This is something that's very important to the community. Health, environment, and quality of life. So things about beautification and safety and supporting access to fresh food, and health and family services. Transportation, we know this is the Silver Line BRT corridor. We really want to leverage that and make sure that that transportation continues to be improved, but also looking at pedestrian bicycle connections, encouraging transit-oriented development, which is really the next step from our planning effort today. So out of that big bundle of projects, 5 really came to the top, and we call those the community-supported catalyst projects. So at our last community meeting, I think we had somewhere between 80 and 100 people that voted using South Division bucks on all the projects, and the top 5 are shown on the screen here today. So those are really our overall marching orders for what do we want to implement first, what is most important to the community. We also looked at the physical changes. So within those focus areas, we wanted to identify opportunities for larger developers, but also smaller mom and pop local developers that could do work within the corridor. So we went site by site, parcel by parcel, and tried to code these different areas for potential redevelopment. There was a real push for equitable development practices, and that we didn't just want larger developers from outside or from somewhere else in the city coming in and doing mega projects. Really looking at that fine-grained detail of renovating a vacant building or building on a vacant lot. And these are just some of the examples, illustrations that we use to support that vision. So this is the South Division and Wealthy area, what it looks like today, and then what the community really wants to see in terms of a vision. Adaptive reuse of some of those vacant buildings, bringing incubator space to the corridor, and really activating the street, making it a more vital and walkable environment. This is South Division and Campow Park, and here we're thinking about transit-oriented development of some higher intensity, but along with it, the public improvements to support that new housing and that new retail. The big vacant building on Division and Hall, which many of you may be familiar with, thinking about that, whether it could be a location for a bank or a pharmacy, 2 of the needs that the community really identified, and how that site could redevelop and what the vision could look like tied to the Silver Line BRT. And then the South Division in Burton, we have a city-owned parking lot right at the corner. It's one of the main intersections in the corridor. and thinking about how that could become a public space, a community marketplace for local events, really transitioning over time into a gathering place. So then we have the implementation section that is really organized around three areas: the stakeholders, the equity, and the city-driven implementation efforts. We have a matrix of all the projects that are in the plan. This is something you've probably seen typically with complexity, estimated cost, timeline, who are the leads of these projects. And then each of those priority projects has its own cut sheet, which has a much more detailed description of the project and the steps, the resources, and the outcomes. And this one, the Storefront Improvement Program, is actually one of the catalyst projects, so it has two sheets. And then we also have we've developed an equitable scorecard for the community's use in assessing and analyzing new development. And each of the scoring areas is organized around those community priorities. So this has been really interesting to put together, and this could be a useful tool for other neighborhoods within the city of Grand Rapids as well. So with that, that's kind of my summary. We're looking at hopefully your approval to release the public document for the 42-day review period. We also have a smaller summary document that's really a poster size that condenses all the key points of the plan into something that's that you can look at in 5 minutes, and it's bilingual. So we want to release that as well. And then moving into the fall for the adoption of the plan. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any more feedback.
Great, thank you. All right, commissioners, questions or comments? It's a great overview of the work and the plan, so thank you for that. Commissioner Leonard, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say thank you for this overview. It's really detailed and easy on the eyes. Thank you for that. And thank you to all of the steering committee members for your commitment for over a year, making sure that this plan comes to fruition. I'm glad to be at this phase of sharing it with the public, getting some feedback, and hopefully finally an approval real soon. Thank you.
And just speaking for the steering committee and the ambassadors and everyone that's been involved, they're really want to ensure that the city's committed to carrying out the implementation steps, and that the elected leadership can really support this plan and help move it forward.
Thank you. Thanks. I'll add my thanks to everyone who worked so hard to bring it this far. So, thank you.
I appreciate the intentionality. We have a couple of the ambassadors here, people from the steering committee. Courtney Magaluk, who's not with the city anymore, was a huge part of that team as well, so I want to make sure to say thanks to her. I love the scorecard. I love the catalyst, like breaking down it to 5 catalyst projects, and it's just so timely because people are starting to look south already, and I'm getting more and more calls. I met on site with a person at one of those corners this week, and so I think it's really important that we get this ratified by the community and adopted before people start to put together their plans for those developments.
Yeah, well said, Commissioner. Commissioner Kelly, did you have a comment?
I just am so impressed. Again, I see you out there, Anna, and know that you fed thousands of people to get them involved in this. And thank you for all your work, everyone. I see Lorena out there too on this project, and you too, Commissioner Reppert. This is really impressive. I mean, this is really reflective of the goals that we've laid out in our strategic plan. I know it won't be easy to manage to bring all this to fruition, but I think that having this plan in place then also informs, of course, the Planning Commission as things come before you. And I look forward to seeing more of this happening in other areas of the city. So this is great. Suzanne, were you about to add something?
I think since this is my last city commission meeting, and I do want to take the opportunity on this plan just to comment, I think we have a history of plan implementation in this city that I think is, bar none, some of the best in the country. And the intentionality that when we do these plans to make sure that they can be implemented by testing the ideas, having community support, and then figuring it out, it does take, as I'm leaving, I'm like, who's going to own this and what's left? And I think that's an important question. I think what's really inspirational is similar to, I was just telling Eric about this yesterday, When we finished Green Grand Rapids, we had new nonprofits that were created out of this process. We had the Friends of Grand Rapids Parks. They had been starting to be formed. We had their work program ready for them. But you also had Grand Rapids Whitewater that was created from the process, and Greater Grand Rapids Bicycle Coalition that was created from the process. EPIC is one of those, with Sini Jordan and Tim Bracey and other leadership, that they're forming their own entity to try to make sure implementation happens. The Corridor Improvement Authority is going to be critical to implementation going forward because of their resources and their ability to organize. So there's these key pieces that I don't want to have lost that I think are really critical to moving that. And there is some low-hanging fruit in here. And I think the Rapid's about to undergo, from the Federal Transit Authority, a transit-oriented development plan. The beauty of this plan, I think, is really it sets the foundation for equity and the expectations by the community of how they want to interact with developers. And we've always said developers aren't mind readers, and that they need to, if you can express it and let them know what's important to you, then they are generally willing to kind of walk alongside the community. And this community has not been afraid of talking with developers. There were developers on the steering committee, but there's that expectation of how this is going to happen, and the community does not want to be left behind. And so I think this plan really emphasizes that and really kind of brings that to the fore. I think the capacity and leadership that was built during this process in the advisors and the steering committee that really own this now. The beauty of creating the advisory group before we had a steering committee was really interesting and a learning experience for me, from the standpoint that people who might normally not have been comfortable being thrown right into a steering committee process with people who have already been engaged, who already have power and control over things, them being able to find their voice before others were engaged was really a powerful thing, because they could have ownership and an agency over that work. And I think that has really manifested itself in the document as well.
Well, thank you for your leadership with this. This is helpful to get that overview as well, to see how we will move forward.
And they're just an amazing group, so.
All right. Commissioners, any final comments? City Manager, did you want to make a comment?
I too want to express my appreciation to our consultant, our community partners, as well as to the staff for the work in bringing this forward. And as Ms. Schultz tested, people are already, now it's not approved yet, but I've received several proposals from community groups to begin to even start operationalizing some of the aspects of the plan and tying it into our FY20 strategic plan, and even proposing some new initiatives for next year. So there's definitely a lot of excitement for some of the elements in the plan. So regarding the sustainability and the continuance of it, I think people already begin to embrace it.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll add my thanks to Ms. Schultz, and how nice that this is on the agenda for your last City Commission meeting. And I know my colleagues feel the same. We wish you well and appreciate all you've done in our city over a very long time. So, thank you.
Well, she has to get us through the marijuana items.
Oh, well. I know it's not, but for planning purposes, you've been working on this effort for a long time. So I'm sure it feels good to you to see it come before us today so that we can make it available to the public and it can move forward in the process. So commissioners, you have that on page 28, next steps. So today, with the motion that I'll call momentarily, this will release this plan for public comment, and then there's a number of other steps before it comes back to us for formal adoption in November. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? It carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, commissioners, next it'll take us to item number 9, and this is consideration of a contract for a housing practice leader services with Housing Next in the amount of $92,625. And I think before I turn it to our deputy city manager, I'll turn it to our city manager to tee up, and then we'll have our deputy fill us in from here. City manager?
So moved.
Thank you. Got a motion and support to bring it before us for consideration. City Manager, you want to start us off and then turn it to our deputy?
Thank you, Mayor. We're pleased today to bring forward these two items consistent with the direction in our strategic plan that allows us to very deliberately move forward on making sure that we have affordable housing in our community. As I mentioned during the budget process, we have a lot of great staff working on housing efforts, but we don't have a housing department. We have great partnership. I see our housing commissioner, Carlos, is here. Great partnership with the Housing Commission, but again, one of the things we lack as an organization is capacity. We have a planning department does great land use work on housing. Our economic development department does great incentives for lots of redevelopment, and our community services department does good work in terms of compliance as well as some of the federal programs. But we really need a housing strategy that is rolled up, that has an enterprise look at the organization and the community. And we could have staffed for it internally, and so what we've done is done two parts. What you have before you, Mr. Long, will give us an overview of the two items. One is for mainly staff support services. And I want to really clarify that because I read the report yesterday from the MLive report that said that we were contracting for $112,000 for a study. And this is not a $112,000 study. The first contract is for staff work. That's work that I need someone to do as staff, and we would have otherwise had to create a position to do that. That would have cost us a lot more. So this is staff services. Then the other item that Mr. Longo explained, the $20,000, is exactly that. That is for housing needs assessment, which will be a study. And so I may have taken a little bit of your thunder, but if you could, I'm sure there's some other things that I did not elaborate on.
Let's vote.
So first, we'll take specifically the staffing services contract, and that is the item before us right now.
Thank you, Mayor and Commission, and City Manager for that good introduction. So this is part of our strategic plan. It is in our fiscal plan, and you may recall that you allocated $137,500 for contract services in this year's fiscal plan. So the work that we'll be doing with this first contract are the staff support services that the City Manager outlined, and it will produce several important outcomes. So first, there will be a development support policy that will be introduced and approved, and so we'll look through all of our development supports that we have now, see if they're tailored properly for this work, see if there are things that we are missing, and develop a comprehensive development support policy that will help us produce housing. Next will be a property inventory, so we'll look at our current city-owned properties, so maybe the properties that are currently under the jurisdiction of the Kent County Land Bank, that could go to the Michigan Land Bank, could be other properties that we own, and see what their potential for housing development might be, and then as we get into the housing strategy, what type of housing might be best constructed on those sites, if that's how we decide to move. Then we'll do some work on equitable housing strategies, so we'll be more focused on that than we have in the past. And then the next two items that I'll tell you about are having to do with the Community Housing Fund, which have to do with taking what we have called the Affordable Housing Community Fund and developing a really direct strategy around that and investment guidelines. That'll start with, first, a best practice review of all the affordable housing funds in the area. So those, we took a trip to Minneapolis a couple of years ago and just, talked about their affordable housing fund. That could be one best practice, but there are others as well that could be looked at as well. And then we'll develop a final recommendation for the use of the Affordable Housing Community Fund that will then be implemented, recommended to you and hopefully implemented during this pilot period. Also, we'll do a zoning audit. So we did a fair amount of work with our zoning ordinance as part of the Housing Now work. That was good work. Part of it will be to evaluate what's transpired as a result of that, and also then to look at what is in our zoning ordinance that may still provide barriers to creation of affordable housing. And then there'll be oversight and project management for the housing needs analysis. So we're going to get some significant and definite outcomes. There'll be staff coordination, and you'll see, I think, rapid progress as we move forward under this contract. The contract will be with Housing Next, which has done very well in their work in Ottawa County and comes to us highly recommended. We've had good conversations with them, and we recommend this contract to you. for a 9-month pilot.
Great, thank you. All right, commissioners, any questions or comments? Commissioner Repart?
Yeah, I just want to say that I want to affirm the selection of Housing Next and Ryan Kilpatrick and the work that they're doing. I'm excited about all 7 of these bullets because I feel like as we were navigating Housing Now, data and best practices were the tools that we needed to answer the many questions that we received, and those are going to get these 7 things are going to get us that on many, many different levels. And so very, very excited to see this happening and excited to work with Ryan, who's been sharing information with us freely for a long time, but this will get us a lot more of his time and attention.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Okay, Commissioner Kelly?
Just a comment that I'm very excited about it as well, that we have been working to get to this place, and out of this, I think, will come additional policies and plans for hopefully some real, a comprehensive overview of what we need now, but also going in the future, how we can make sure that we don't have to necessarily revisit all the time because we have perhaps land in place and options in place, because we will always have to face this problem to one degree or another. And remind us that years ago, it wasn't called affordable housing, it was called public housing. That was very commonplace, and that there are just needs as people transition through their lifetime. They might be young and just out of college, or you might be a single widow or widower. So there are always times in our lives when we need to transition into different forms and types of housing. So I'm really excited about this work ahead. And thank you, Ryan, and thank you also to the Housing Commission. Thank you, Carlos, for being here today.
Thank you. I'll just add one thing. I'll turn to City Manager before I call the question. We all know that housing continues to be a critical issue in the city, and we've done a lot of good work, but I believe we have a lot more to do. And having the resources and support to move forward strategically, I think, is really critical. So,
Quick
Commissioner
comment
Lanier,
or
and then-
question, actually. I think I'm clear on the majority of what's outlined here in this document. I'm a little bit foggy, and perhaps it was because I wasn't here last week, on how does this fit with the fund. So can you, I know you talked a little bit about that.
Sure.
Is it dormant? You know, we elected this or appointed this body of people to kind of have oversight over the fund. I'm just not sure.
Sure.
And I think that there was a point where we just pressed pause.
Right.
So how does this impact that? Are we just continuing on with pressing pause with that?
Yes, we're still in pause mode
Okay.
while we deal with this and get this information, because I think there may be a more informed strategic direction for the fund.
After this work.
After this. In fact, I
Okay.
expect there will be. So I think after we're done with this work, we can proceed with confidence and start making investments. Everything is in place for the assets and to start capitalizing the fund when we're ready to move forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
That's a great question, Commissioner, so thank you for clarifying it. And the other, there's a lot of moving parts right now, and I think the other issue that we're still working through is with the county eliminating the land bank, solidifying our relationship, hopefully with the Michigan Land Bank. So again, there's a number of things that I think will, before we move forward with the fund, having that taken care of and a plan in place, and then the strategic plan through the work with this contract. Yeah, yeah. City Manager, any final thoughts before I call the question?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, my appreciation is to the staff for the work. Also, we will have a update. We've been talking to Mr. Sanchez about having a Housing Commission update. I know they've just completed their annual report and coming and giving that update or accountability to the commission on the work that is going on there. I think at that time, we can also talk a little bit about our thoughts around the kind of things that we potentially that we now are more informed of, that we can use the fund for, that when I think initially envisioned, we're much more limited or myopic in terms of what we thought could be potential uses. But I do look forward to that briefing, and we just not yet scheduled a date with Mr. Sanchez about bringing forth an update from the Housing Commission.
Great, thanks. All right, so with that, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? It carries. All right, next it will take us to our 10th item, and this is consideration of investing $20,000 in a housing needs assessment with community partners through an agreement with the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right.
So, thank you, Mayor. This item will have us enter into a partnership with the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce and also with the Fry Foundation in terms of creating a housing needs analysis. And so we talked about in the last item having to have information and data about housing demand, housing needs, and this will give us the most comprehensive information we've ever had for the city of Grand Rapids and also for Kent County as a whole. And so because it's a housing supply issue in addition to an affordable housing issue. And so this will give us information about the entire market, also give us information specifically about affordable housing, but will allow us to understand what investments need to happen in order to make a difference. How do we make the best investments and the best difference? And it'll be a guide for where we might target investments. It'll be a guide for our housing support policies or incentive policies. And I think how we might use our own property to help move things forward. So it's a really important piece of information that we haven't had. The study would be done through the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce. They want to partner with us. It's one of their strategies as well. And the Fry Foundation has an interest also. So the Fry interest is pending, but we expect it to move forward. And once that happens, the chamber will enter into a contract with the provider, and we'll get the study underway. And our share is actually $20,900. Sorry, the title is wrong. The resolution is correct, the title is wrong. So.
Thank you, which is still less than 50% of the overall cost of the study because of our
we have
other
lots of
partners.
potential other investors here with us, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. I know Josh is here, Josh Lunger is here from the Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank him for being here, but also thank the Chamber for their leadership. Housing has come up as a priority in the business community as well, as they work really hard to attract talent, but also make sure that people can live in the community in which they work. So thanks for being here. The other thing I will add, Commissioners, is that we have had conversations with our partnering cities, recognizing that this analysis will be done countywide, and they too are eager to have good data and information as they work on their own goals around housing. And so we continue to work with our other units of government because we know that this truly is an issue that goes well beyond our geographical lines. City Manager?
Nothing else?
All right. Okay. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. DeLong. All right, Commissioners, our next 6 items I'm going to try to get through by 11 so we can go into executive session before public safety and before legislative. And this, I'm going to tee it up because it's a little confusing since this is a new process for us. And so I'm going to read through the process, and then Ms. Schultz will be here to help us. I'll call each item individually, but let me walk you through the process. So today before us, we have 6 parks up for review, parks where there's been a request for a waiver in proximity to a marijuana facility. Our role, because we are a property owner, is to determine if the majority of the commission objects to the waiver request. And so staff has done an analysis, and I believe Mr. Amante is also available to provide information on each park. We had a public hearing. We were able to get feedback on each of these locations. So what we're going to do today is we're going to proceed in the order that they're on the agenda. If there is an objection to a particular park, then we will consider the proposed resolution. If there's not an objection for a particular park or request, then no action is required. So we just have to move forward any objection to allowing a waiver. Does that make sense? It's a little confusing. So if we don't have an objection, we don't need to act or make a motion. But if we do have an objection to the request for a waiver, then we will need to bring that item up for a vote, okay? And then the Planning Commission will consider our input when they ultimately make their decision regarding site plan approval for each of the 6 applications. Okay, is that clear? All right, Commissioner Kelly?
I have
Any
one-
question about the process?
Yes, I do, because there were a couple I wanted to comment on just because I have had letters of support.
We'll bring up each one
Right.
individually. But when it
Okay.
actually comes to a motion,
Yeah.
if there's one where there's no concern
Mm-hmm.
and there's no objection to the waiver, then we don't need to move that one forward or discuss it further.
Perfect.
Okay? So City Manager, anything to add?
I would suggest that we allow Ms. Schultz to do her overview, Mr. Almonte to move through all 6, and then Mayor, you go back and then take them serial item one park by,
Okay.
one location by each location, rather.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I feel like we've already, please keep it brief is my point, I suppose.
yes, we will be
Because I
brief.
want to get to these items, because we have a full agenda, but also I feel like we've, as a full body, have had the presentation, we had the public hearing, and so we don't need to
We're-
go too deep into these.
We're prepared for a brief conversation.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, Suzanne then, and then I'll turn to Mr. Almonte, and then I'll call each one up.
Thank you, Mayor. So, as was mentioned, when you adopted the zoning ordinance in July 24th, 2018, and then amended in December 2018, there were 3 separation distances in the ordinance where you said you would grant waivers. The waivers for parks and schools, churches, and rehabilitation facilities. That, the way we amended the ordinance is allows for the property owner to potentially object to the planning commission considering the granting of a waiver. So the city commission, as the property owner of the parks, that's why it's in front of you, is to potentially object to get your input on whether or not the planning commission should consider that in their review of the special land use request for a marijuana facility. Your city commission policy adopted on December 4th identifies criteria, which is included in the resolutions, and then you also have your policy attached. But it identifies 4 criteria that you should consider whether or not you want to grant a park distance or whether or not you want to object. One is it's consistent with or will not materially impair the purpose and intent of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. 2, will not place an excessive burden on services currently furnished or may be required by the city or a public agency, including but not limited to park maintenance and operations. 3, will exhibit appropriate mitigation measures to reduce potentially adverse impacts such as landscaping, tree planting, fencing, or similar effects. And 4, whether one or more of the following conditions exist which would reduce potential detrimental impacts if the waiver was granted. So exceptional topographic or environmental conditions such as steep slope, significant amount of mature vegetation, or a fixed or an unmovable natural feature or barrier such as a river, freeway, other things that are significant barriers which won't allow for access. And then whether or not the orientation of the park entrance and the proposed marijuana facility, if they're far enough apart where you don't feel it's going to have an influence on the park location. So there are 6 waivers, as was mentioned. 3 of them are dealing with the Plaster Creek Network and Kenosha Park. We won't go through each one. We will go through each one first. You wanted to cover each one?
No, we'll let, if now, we can turn it over to Mr. Almonte, and he can talk about the.
And then we'll take
Parks
each
and-
one individually.
yeah,
Okay.
Right.
Mayor, Commissioner, City Manager, and what I'm going to do is go through each one of the location. It's just good to mention that the location 1 through 5, we concentrated based on the 4th criteria, which has to do with not only the network distance, but the direct distance as it relates to the location and the facility. And based on that, we did an analysis to see how each one of those locations meet against those 2 criteria under number 4, okay? For 549 Michigan, Highland Park, the network distance between the proposed use of the parks exceed the 1,000 feet. The proposed use is also separated from the park facility by the interstate highway. And based on that, staff see no reason to object to this location. 910 is 928 on 28th Street, Kenosha. The network distance between the proposed use and the park exceed the 1,000 feet. The proposed use is also separated from the park facility by other developed properties, and there are also a heavy vegetative screen that protect the property. There are also significant topographical differences, and based on that, staff see no reason to object to this location. 940 28th Street, Kenosha, similar to 928. The network distance exceed the 1,000 feet, and it also separated from the park by other developed properties and also heavy vegetation that screen the facility. So staff see no objection to this location. 1,000 Kenosha Industry Park Southeast, this is Kenosha Park. The network distance between the proposed use and the park exceed the 1,000 feet. The proposed use is also separated from the park facility by other developed properties. There is also heavy vegetation that screen the facility, and as the other property, the topographical differences protect the facility, and staff see no reason to object to this location. 1109 Michigan Street, Fuller Park. The network distance between the proposed use of the facility and the park exceed the 1,000 feet, and the proposed use is also separated from the park facility by two major arterial streets, Michigan Street and Fuller Avenue Northeast. Based on that, staff see no reason to object to this location. 49 Corbrook Northeast, Bergnat Park. Both of the direct distance is 60 feet, and the network distance is 200 feet between the proposed use and the park, are both below the 1,000 feet. This main park entrance is the only entrance to vehicle located within across of the street of the proposed use of the facility. There's this direct line of sight between the two locations. There are no separated facilities from the park and the proposed facility. And the arterial street that is in front of the park is also the only one used for the entrance of this facility. Based on those criteria, staff recommend that the City Commission file an objection to this location.
All right, thank you. City Manager, anything before I go through each one?
Nothing else to add, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, so Commissioners, we'll pull up each one. If there is an objection to the request for a waiver, then I'll ask for a motion for that resolution. If there's not an objection, then we will move on to the next one, and we'll just go down the list, okay? All right, I see confused faces, but we're going to try to work through this. So the first one, so it's a resolution to consider a waiver of the required separation distance from public parks for the proposal at 49 Coldbrook Street Northeast. So is there, I suppose I don't need a motion unless.
There's a motion.
Thank you. Okay, so motion and support. So let's specifically talk about the Coldbrook location. And Commissioners, I'll turn to you. If somebody has an objection to allowing this waiver, so if you do not support a waiver for this location, you are Commissioner Kelly. I'll turn to my second ward colleagues first, since it's in their ward.
Yes, we've received communication from the neighbors of Belknap Lookout, and they do not see any reason to object to this facility being there. And here are the reasons that they cite: that much of the park's infrastructure, including the athletic fields, are located further south into the park, away from the site. The proposed site has a significant amount of parking and thus will not create excessive street parking or other burdens on Belknap Park. And we recall from the compendium that parking was an issue. This is why we were looking for sites where, like 28th Street, Alpine, Plainfield, and so on. And this is one of those Plainfield sites that has plenty of parking, because that turned out to be one of the issues in other states. And the applicant is willing to erect at their own cost additional landscaping or other barriers. So as I look at that site, and I agree with the input that we've received, it is, there's no residential housing near this. The park, you go toward the river and it's all businesses, and beyond that, you have to go up the hill or across busy Leonard Street. It is close to Belknap Park, but I agree that it's not in the area where, it's just separated, I would say, by the nature of the location is just very busy and kind of industrial and manufacturing. There's a carpet shop, there's a t-shirt shop and a laundry facility.
And the topography is significant, the grade.
The grade right behind it.
You do have the Housing Commission property across the street.
You do have, you have about a couple blocks away, there is a Housing Commission property, right?
So this is at the
Coldbrook.
Coldbrook and where the rail line comes through. So just on just to
Off
the
of
north
Cedar.
of the main entrance for Griff's Ice House.
Yep. Okay, so you're saying you are supportive of the waiver and you're not objecting to this location?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any objection to this waiver request? Commissioner
Object.
Jones?
Yeah.
Okay,
I will
so
be
you want to add anything to that?
I will say that a number of, well, the vast majority of these that are coming before us, I will be, I'll just go ahead and put it out there ahead of the decisions. I will be opposing the waiver, except for one. And part of it has to do really with what my position has been since this has come before us some time ago. And that is the issue that I know that we have very little to do with, who is positioned to have ownership and to prosper economically from this. But I will say that that has always been an issue for me, continues to be an issue, the fact that we have very little to do with that decision-making, and yet this is an opportunity for us where we do have a decision. We have a say in the decision. And it's my understanding, based on the 6 that are before us, that there is just one that has significant ownership that is either African-American or Latino, or Latinx rather, and that's the one that I will be supporting, but the others I will not be supporting. So, yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner?
I'm in opposition based on staff's recommendation and the park entrance being very close to the site location, the only park entrance being really close to the site location.
Okay, all right. Anyone else wish to weigh in? Okay, so I'm going to call the question. Those who are opposed, please say aye.
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 Those who are supportive, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so it passes. Two
No.
opposite. No, it does not pass. Thank you.
Right.
All right, so it does not pass. So there is support for this waiver. All right.
Hold on, I want to clarify the record we made. So Mayor, first of all, I think you did a great job explaining what we were trying to accomplish today. We were only voting if there were an objection. And so the motion was to object the waiver. That was the first and second. And so
And
the
two
question that was
supported,
asked, I want to make sure that we're clear. When the mayor called the question,
it was in
An
those
objection.
who object to the waiver.
okay, all right. So,
Yes.
great.
And
All
that's
right.
how the resolution is written.
Yep.
So,
All right.
okay, all right, so it passes. Next is the resolution to consider.
So it doesn't, it fails.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It fails. That's what's
It
confusing. It
fails. That's why it's so
fails.
confusing. Okay.
The motion to
Thank you for
object failed.
clarifying.
Right.
It fails.
It
Thank
fails,
you.
meaning that there will be.
The objection failed.
The objection fails.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Objection
you.
fails, okay.
Wait, sorry. I just want to confirm that Kelly, Lanier, and Jones voted no.
No, Commissioner Jones and Commissioner Lanier. Commissioner Kelly.
You had it right here.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted to
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so next will be, we're going to consider the resolution to consider a waiver of the required separation distance from public parks for the proposed medical marijuana facility at 549 Michigan Street Northeast. So if we can pull that visual up, that would be helpful. Oh, is it right here? We already have it in front of us. So it's way down here on Michigan Street in the yellow. So do I have a motion for that? So this would be, again, if you wish to object to this waiver. Can I have a motion? If not, we'll move forward.
So moved.
So moved. And do I have a support?
Support.
Okay, so moved and supported. Again, I will call the question for those who object. If you object, then say yes. If you don't object, we'll say no, but I'll give it to Commissioner Kelly. Again, this is in the second ward, so I'll turn to our second ward colleagues to talk about this location on whether they support the waiver or do not. Commissioner Kelly?
Okay, so my concern here is that it is very much in the middle of a residential sector, recognizing too that, yes, the Housing Commission, oh, I see Carlos has left, and I should have mentioned that. Highland Park is close. Now, there is the barrier there. I know it's going to be probably years before we can manage to do this, but we are hoping to open up that barrier, remove that barrier at some point.
Hopefully not that many years.
Hopefully not that many years, so that we can add a bicycle corridor, maybe even walking corridor along the railroad corridor. And that would open that area up very close to Highland Park. The other concern I have really has more to do with the Planning Commission when they deliberate on this, because there are serious parking concerns in this area. And again, back to the 132-page compendium that staff worked so hard on, and we appreciate it so much. Parking just really came out as an issue in all communities as being important, and that's in part because Grand Rapids is the only place short of Lansing where people will come for this kind of business. So just from feedback I've got, we didn't get any letters from Midtown or Noble, but from the feedback that I have gotten from individuals, there's concern around this space.
You did, Commissioner, just briefly on the input, for the public hearing, you did get several people who spoke in support, and then you did get a written correspondence in opposition to the waiver citing their support for the ordinance restrictions put in place for marijuana facilities.
Yeah.
Pertaining to this request.
Right.
Yeah, we have heard
Saw those.
from both sides. I think there's support and I think there's clear opposition. All right, anything else said? Commissioner Jones, anything to add to that?
Nope.
Okay, all right, so commissioners, if you are opposed to allowing a waiver for this site, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. If you are supportive of the waiver, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so I think this one passes on a 4-3 vote.
Can I ask a question? I wonder,
And that's-
because the waiver is, do you object to the waiver? So I think the question is, does anyone object to the waiver?
Yeah.
And then you take the vote and 2 people say, or however many people say yes, and then that's your record.
Right.
And then she'll record.
That's what I just did, right? 4 people objected to the waiver. Did I say that right?
Where you're doing 2, you're kind of doing 2 though.
Oh, I'm asking two questions, and then those who oppose.
I think
It's confusing. Okay, okay. All right, I'll just ask the one question, and then all right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. It is weird with it being a kind of a double negative.
Yes.
All right, so,
That's the problem.
so that waiver, I will summarize, that waiver is not supported. Okay, so that will take us to the third resolution, and this is to consider a waiver of the required separation distance from public parks for the facility at 1109 Michigan Street Northeast.
Support,
Is there support?
or excuse me,
I have a motion.
Support.
A motion and support. Okay, so this item is up before us for discussion. Again, this location is off of Michigan, but it's a little bit tucked back, and so let's see if we can get the visual up. All right, and it's, the proximity is to Fuller Park, which is crossed on the other side of Michigan and Fuller. Commissioner, I'll turn again to Second Ward colleagues. Commissioner Kelly, you want to start?
Yes, again, I think this is a good location. There's plenty of parking. It is on very busy Fuller Street. It is north of Michigan, so it's an industrial area again. And if you drive over there, you actually notice it's kind of a concave area, so it doesn't even show from the street. I mean, I think as our residents are adjusting to this change, I think that it's in our best interest to provide some of that distance, and we see how things work. And again, back to that 132-page compendium in the parking, this is an ideal location. So I think that the removal from neighbors nearby, a lot of neighbors nearby, is good, and the parking is good. So I think that this is a very good location.
Okay, all right, so I'm going to call the question. All those who oppose this waiver, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. And those who don't, say nay.
Nay.
All right. It fails. All right, it fails. I think I got this now.
You got it.
3 in, 3 to go, commissioners. Bear with me, I'm sorry. Okay, so the next one, a resolution to consider a waiver of the required separation distance from public parks for the proposed facility at 1000 Kenosha Industrial Park Southeast. Can I get a motion for this?
So move.
Is there support?
Support.
All right, motion made and supported. Commissioners, we heard feedback on this location at the public hearing. You can see it before us. This one, again, there were a number of folks who came in opposition, some voices of support. It was mixed feedback. I'll turn to my third ward colleagues to start us off. Commissioner Moody or Commissioner Lanier, you want to speak to this?
I'm not in favor of this one, primarily because of the fact that there is great opposition from the community in that area. You have churches and some businesses. It's almost, in my readings, close to the proximity of those churches and that residential community park.
Yeah, and you can see that a bit on the map, the proximity. Commissioner Lanier?
The only thing I'll add is the community meeting that they did hold, there were only 2 people present, and which speaks to kind of the level of engagement, I think. And those persons present, I know out of the 2, at least there was one in opposition. I think the other was just kind of there to hear. I concur with my colleague, Commissioner Moody.
Okay, all right. So I'll call the question. Those opposed to this waiver, please say aye.
Aye.
Those who are, and then all those not, say nay. Okay. It carries. So the waiver is not supported.
Correct.
Okay.
So the commission objects.
Commission
Yes.
objects,
Yes.
thank you.
Another word.
I'm so glad.
All right, and then that'll take us to item 15. This is a resolution to consider a waiver of the required separation distance from public parks for the proposed medical facility at 940 28th Street. Can I get a motion?
So move.
Support.
All right, so commissioners, we're familiar with this location. These are located on 28th Street. Again, you can see them on the map before us. And I'll turn again to our third ward colleagues. I'll start with Commissioner Lanier.
I think to Commissioner Kelly's point earlier about kind of the locations and parking in 28th Street and Plainfield and all those other areas, generally speaking, I wouldn't have any opposition. But what I'd like to do is have some conversation, and I know we spoke with the city manager about, Commissioner Moody and I spoke with the city manager about a property that was also on 28th Street. And I think we're kind of foggy on the cemetery, which we typically consider a park, but it's not necessarily being a part of the park's waiver. But there was a property in question on 20, very close to where these are. And because there was a cemetery, I guess cemeteries are, so why do we, if they're zone residential, why do we call them parks? I guess that's the confusion. And I'm just thinking that in the event that there may have been an opportunity to do a waiver for that particular property, it could change the outcome of these that are before us today. So it sounds like we can't do a waiver for residential, but it's also a park.
So our parks are zoned open space, and in the zoning ordinance, in the provisions when we drafted them for what could be allowed waivers, we had parks and schools, churches, and rehab facilities where the ordinance explicitly allowed a waiver to occur. The ordinance also has additional requirements for setbacks, such as between facilities and between residential zone district. Residential zone district is not identified as a waivable separation distance. So that's the distinction. And in this case, I can't explain why the cemetery is zoned residential and our parks are zoned open space. But that's that nuance that you get into, is that you're doing these parks waivers and it's zoned open space, like Kenosha, for example. But the cemetery across the street on 28th Street is zoned residential. And so we can't, the ordinance doesn't allow us to grant a waiver.
So,
Can I get clarity on something though,
Zone.
Suzanne?
yeah,
Have to rezone.
You would have to rezone the
cemeteries
cemetery.
from residential to open space.
But
Yes.
cemeteries are under Parks and Recs though, is that correct?
correct.
Yes.
Okay, so if they're under Parks and Recs, you would almost think that since you're calling it a park,
Right.
that it is definitely considered to be a park, but at the same time residential. Just being funny, I don't know if anybody in those cemeteries is receiving any mail or not, but
Right. That is funny, Commissioner.
We would hope not, but I do think that that's a zoning issue that needs to change.
yeah.
And the
Sorry,
zoning
City Manager, I just want to throw that in
ordinance.
there. But, sorry, Madam Mayor, the reason why I'm so concerned about this, because this situation came up to us last year when Mr. Dittmer was requesting a waiver. And he was just short of 1,000 feet. And we were just dealing with the fact that, when he went, I think he did go to the Planning Commission and that he.
Yeah, Board of Zoning Appeals, he went
Goes
for
to
a
BZA.
variance.
Right, and what was happening, that the zoning piece was a very big factor, and I have no problem with doing waivers. I just wanted to make sure that in the future, when this come up, because I'm sure this is going to come back to us, that we have to be prepared to make some adjustments.
Yeah, because if I can just join you in this, I think the other piece to it is that it seemed like it would have come before the commission for a discussion of some sort. Now, perhaps we weren't at the place that we're at now, where we have a process in place. But I just think because we know that one location dictates the next location, that I'm really, really concerned that, because I think when he came before us during public comment and went to staff, the question was, okay, we were all assuming that because of how it's defined as a park, the cemeteries are parks. And so I don't think any of us would have thought that they would have been residential. Right next door to it is JC's. So potentially, it could be a part of this list today as we're doing waivers, had we had an opportunity to rezone parks, cemeteries as parks, so that it could be consistent with how we've been labeling cemeteries all along as parks. And, so I don't know if it makes sense for us to postpone this discussion until we can sort through some of that, because they were in line before these. And I'm fearful that the impact of this is going to harm someone, and I don't know who. I don't even know the people involved, as much as I want to make sure that we are doing this, fair and consistent.
Mayor?
So I'm going to turn to City Manager, and then if Suzanne has additional information, because I can't recall where that process was. I know because of the zoning, it went in front of the BZA and not in front of planning.
Correct.
So maybe you can help us understand that process and where we can and can't get involved in the zoning piece of it, because they're quasi-judicial, and I respect that. City Manager?
Well, I was going to mention similar to that, too, and just for clarity, we are not approving waivers on the dais today. We are discussing our preferences for whether or not we would have objections or concerns like anybody else that would go before the Planning Commission. In that case, it was the Board of Zoning Adjustment. So in that instance, the final decision, if you will, on that property should have occurred by the BZA and perhaps more appropriately without our input on preferences. And so I'll defer to Ms. Schultz.
So what's in the ordinance is what we administer. And so in the case of Mr. Dittmar, we do not have a pending application from Mr. Dittmar for his property. So there's no application to respond to that would affect, to the question of does this affect others? It wouldn't, because we don't have another application for his property. The zoning, I think you do have the opportunity. You are the legislative body, so you have control over the laws, which is the zoning ordinance, both the map and the text. Future potential amendments that the commission could consider is changing the zoning designation of cemeteries to open space. You could also look at your separation distances for marijuana uses. Frankly, we did not want to open that, feeling that was a Pandora's box until we got through this first whole wave of requests, so that we did not bring back something to you to have that discussion, because it could have gotten very, very messy. And we have an established process. We want to follow that process. Otherwise, it opens us up to potential litigation and all sorts of things. So we wanted to stick with the process that was adopted for medical and to see that through and let that play out. But you will have the opportunity in the future, I believe, to go through and consider what changes you would want to make after we've had this learned experience.
But I will add from memory, there was significant support to have distance requirements from residentially zoned areas. So I don't think that is the question. I think we talked about that at length and support that, hearing from neighbors. I think the question is how cemeteries are currently zoned, whether they are open space or residential. And it sounds like that is something that we could pursue changing. That wouldn't necessarily open up the medical marijuana ordinance. It would open up the language on the designation of cemeteries from residential to open spaces, which then would potentially impact the number of potential locations for marijuana dispensaries.
Correct.
But it wouldn't just be on 28th Street. I mean,
Sure.
obviously, we have.
That's true.
We have cemeteries in every single ward, and some of them really in close proximity to residential neighborhoods. Some of them actually completely surrounded by residential neighborhoods.
Which is why they're typically zoned residential, because of their placement within the context of a residential area.
Yeah.
Well, and Mayor, and I know we have a full day, but I just want to add, I think what happened with Mr. Dittmar is that the interested party who had interest in his property, when he wasn't able to get the zoning changed to the BZA, they went elsewhere, because it didn't make sense to enter into a contract and file for an application. And again, I think because of when all that took place, I just fear that there will be an inequity at the end of this. Because again, had the outcome of that, had it come before this body to say, because we were inquiring, it wasn't that he came and gave public comment and we didn't see him.
Right.
We were inquiring. Commissioner Moody on several occasions asked questions about this because we wanted a resolution. And if now hearing that the resolution potentially could have been rezoning cemeteries as open space, that probably could have been done before today.
There is a process for that as
Yeah.
well. It would probably take,
And I mean, it was months ago that he came before this body.
how long would that take to?
Well, the rezoning process takes generally 8 weeks, 2 months. And when he submitted, we would have to go back and do a timeline. I'm looking back at Kristen, but we had the March submittal date for the items. And I don't believe there would have been enough time to rezone all of the cemeteries to parks, even with that timeline.
I'd like to see the timeline, and then I also want to know how will his property fare in relation to the two properties that we're considering today? So we know that one approval, which we know that we're not approving the sites as much as we're talking about the waivers, which potentially could allow for an approval of the site. Would there be an opportunity for his site then to be approved with the distance that exists on these
Yeah, I can't remember the,
940 and 928.
We would have to look, it was over by the Meyer. I think one caution though, and it is, I think one caution that we would have to the commission is that when you have one property owner asking for something that is different than what other similarly situated properties have, you start, that can be starting to get on thin ice. Like, how many exceptions do you want to grant and how many times do you want to amend the ordinance based off of one property owner's interest?
Well, I think that's the prerogative of this body.
Yeah.
And had we done all of this when he came before us, then we would have had some conversation about it and made whatever decision. So I'm still trying to figure out the distance between that location near Kalamazoo, and obviously you wouldn't necessarily have that today, but I am curious about that because all of these things matter. We have to be consistent. We have to make sure that we do our due diligence. This is serious business here, and we can't undo what we do because one decision there's a ripple effect. So for me, I have to do my due diligence in order to feel like we've done everything that we would have done. Because if this body does decide at some later date to rezone cemeteries, because we're having this discussion today and chose not to do it even though we were inquiring, and it goes back to some of the conversations that I've talked about, if you don't stand on your foot and do a cartwheel at the right time, even though you're asking the question, you don't get to this point. And sometimes when you get to this point, it's too late. And this is an example of that. Because we would have done what we're having this conversation months ago when Commissioner Moody first brought this to this body, even before Mr. Dittmer made his public comment.
and that is an excellent point. And I'm not sure what that process would have turned out to be because I don't really have a good sense of how the community feels about rezoning cemeteries from residential to open space. There may be concerns that are unbeknownst to us that people have. And so I want to be careful not to assume that that would have been the outcome.
Not at all.
But
It's
I
not an
hear what you're
assumption,
saying,
yeah.
that there is a concern with these requests on 28th Street.
Well, Madam Mayor, Susan, thank you for the clarity, because that's basically what I needed. And I thank Commissioner Lanier for bringing forward the things that we have already talked about. I just want to make sure that our commission is clear that there are some things that do need to change. And I just don't want this to come back at us.
No, it's a good conversation, and it's an issue that we do need to explore because it was brought to light. So with that, I'm going to call the question on this item, the 940 28th Street. So those in support of objecting to a waiver request, say aye.
Aye.
Those who are not, say nay.
Nay.
Okay, so it fails. The commission does not object. So next item is the property next to it, the resolution to consider a waiver of the required separation distance for the location at 910 28th Street. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support?
All right, any additional comments? All right, all those in favor of objecting to this waiver, say aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Okay, so the commission does not object to that one. So just a recap of the 6. The commission objects to 2 of the 4. The one located at 1000 Kenosha and the one at 549 Michigan Street. So if that can be relayed to the Planning Commission as they move forward in hearing these requests, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
Stephanie, make sure we're on the.
So we are not objecting to 4 of the requests, and we are objecting to 2.
Okay.
549 was, Michigan was rejected.
Yes.
You got that? Okay.
Yes, yep,
Okay.
yep. Okay, all right. So commissioners, with that, I'm going to ask us to immediately go down to executive session. We'll try to get at least one item covered. We may have to go back into executive session after our other committee meetings today. I do want to respect public safety because we have community members that join us for that. So I am going to adjourn committee of the whole and ask you to go down to the city attorney's office. I need a motion to go into executive session.
So
for
moved.
Thank you. One is for negotiations and one is for a legal opinion. Start down here, Commissioner.
Yes.
Repart. Commissioner Moody?
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yes.
Commissioner Lanier? Yes. Commissioner O'Connor? Commissioner Jones?
Yes.
And yes.